Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning from my side. As I can see, we all pay a little tribute to last night. That was my, not first, but very most intense experience of nightlife in Tbilisi yesterday. But it was so inspiring that we will definitely also refer to that experience in the future of what we discuss in this or other panels on conferences like this. So my aim is to talk about neighborhood conflicts of the nighttime economy, especially on noise issues and in areas with a lot of touristic activities and where we also find several clubs and bars and other institutions of nightlife. If we call it sound or if we call it noise, it depends definitely on the perspective of who is addressing and who is recognizing it on which behavior. And I want to split my speech in two parts. First part is about the background of why we do have so much problems with noise. And second part is I want to introduce you to two strategies we found in Berlin quite suitable and worked out some aspect to solve those problems. And first problem, which underlies the noise and sound dispute, is about gentrification. We know a lot about gentrification already, and we heard also from Shamiro that gentrification is also happening not only in Berlin but in most of the cities we know, and that these processes lead definitely to a lot of conflicts for free spaces as well as for clubs. This has, of course, to do with the upvalue of neighborhoods because of certain development, which also has a lot to do with developing those neighborhoods with the measures of culture, with nighttime activities and other things which follows. So clubs and the nighttime economy is also part of the process, also catalyst of that process, but also, of course, victim of this process, because some of the framework conditions of gentrification process sooner or later turns also against the culture of the night. So I want to stress out kind of like two effects of gentrification which influences the noise situation. This is the change of the inhabitants of those neighborhoods, the citizens who live there or who want to live there. Because usually club culture, if it is a bottom-up culture, if it comes from the underground and develops in this way, is coming up in neighborhoods which have usually a lot of empty spaces and low rents, so that people can afford to live there. And what people do when they are interested in low rents, usually are students or artists or other people with a low income or unregulated income. And so they create their neighborhood, they create their living space in a way they can express themselves, and they can kind of fill their life up with things which are not existing in this neighborhood. And so when the gentrification process starts and develops, rents are rising and situation becomes more and more under pressure of financial aspects. You have exchange of inhabitants, of course, because everyone wants to live in attractive neighborhoods, and so people with more money are interested in moving in there because they like a vital neighborhood, they like to have bars and clubs and restaurants around, and also they love the image of living in a district which is a scene district, which is well known for its interesting aspects of life. And so they are kind of like buying themselves in into those framework conditions. And if someone with money buys himself into a situation, he has expectations, of course. And so what often happens is that people who are new citizens in this neighborhood, because they like the idea of living in a vital place with a lot of nightlife activities, they sooner or later discover that they can't switch it on and off, like they might use it, might like it, but that it's 24 hours, 7 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. So that all the side effects of those lively neighborhoods and vital nightlife activities, they can't be on demand, being part of something which you can enjoy, and if you want to sleep or want to get up early, you can't switch it off simply. So this is what they realize sooner or later, that this has a harder impact on their decisions than they might have been thinking of before. Second thing is that people who live in those neighborhoods, I've been speaking about those students and artists and those people, also they become older over the years, and their life situation might also change. So when they finish university, they become employed, they have to get up early to go to work, they might get children, have family or something like this, and so their priorities in the life is also shifting. But of course they don't want to leave the neighborhood because they feel at home there, all their friends and infrastructure is there, what they really appreciate. And of course they feel also that they have a right to live there, and also that they have the right to address their new perspectives and their changed ideas about what the neighborhood should provide, when it should provide this, and in what intensity. Second part of the problem is touristification process. So you're all heading for more tourists in Tbilisi, and definitely Tbilisi has a lot potential to take a lot of tourists in the city without that the situation collapses in several parts of the city. But we in Berlin face the situation that over the last 10 years, since the World Championship in football 2006, that people all over the world discovered kind of how nice it is to spend some days or weekends in Berlin, to kind of breathe the atmosphere of the city, discover all the cultural aspects, and just simply enjoy also personal freedom, which is somewhat lost in other metropoles of Europe and the world maybe already a little bit. So a lot of tourists come to Berlin to also discover nightlife. We heard yesterday that there's about 30% of all the tourists in Berlin going to clubs. Dimitri said that, and that's more than 60% of all the tourists coming to Berlin are coming because of the cultural diversity of that city. Means that there's, of course, a reaction of this. And you have some neighborhoods with a attractive nightlife, but which are in balance of daytime use and nighttime use of citizens who live there, but also have attractive bars and restaurants, maybe 1-2 small clubs or something like that. This is a kind of neighborhood which is highly attractive to live there, and the people say, oh, it's so nice there, blah, 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 and tourists discover that this is a nice spot to explore, then things might start to change. And especially if you have, like Berlin in summer, such a kind of mass tourism phenomena, those neighborhoods are easily getting out of balance because of so many tourists coming to those neighborhoods. And it is the same with this gentrification thing. If they have money in the pocket, they have expectation, and they have maybe 48 hours to spend in the city. So they want to have holidays, of course, and not making up their mind about too much about people who live in the neighborhoods and their needs and their ideas of how the neighborhood should be like. So there's also campaigns already in Berlin in several districts, kind of to getting tourists aware of that they are not welcome in that big amount, and that there's a lot of trouble which they cause, and that people suggest that there should be less tourism, or no tourism at all in their cities, but in their districts. But of course, this is quite unrealistic. But still, there's some activities to demonstrate that there's a problem with tourists in those neighborhoods. Third part of the problem of noise is about densification of the cities. Shamir, you also said that in your speech that city space is getting more and more valuable, that there's a lot of different interests in, from those people who like to move into the city because they want to live in the city. So also Berlin is densifying massively over the last years. It means that especially in times where interests are at a level of zero and people with money cannot gain profit out of that money by investing in industry or investing in financial products, but where they can get money is by buying land, by buying property, developing it. And of course, if you want to earn money with property management and development, you are not thinking about social housing, you're thinking about luxury homes, you're thinking about condominiums, so that you make out of the most out of your money in a quite short period of time. So the inner city space is getting more and more valuable, and also the spheres in the city, which might have been separated before, are getting closer and closer. So with the effect that there's also tension arising from that field. Okay, what comes out are conflict zones in the city with vital nightlife and club scene. So I have been stressing out that people who live in that neighborhood, that their personal situation change and that they might have different interests in how the neighborhood should provide them with all the benefits of life. I've been also stressing out that new neighborhoods who like the colorful approach of the certain scene districts are not aware of every side effect and that it's a constant situation that they're moving in. And so they try to also avoid certain consequences better than taking everything like it is. I've been also pointing out that tourists are unaware of the needs of the people, of the citizens who live in those neighborhoods, and that from that also arises some conflict. And we see that because of the densifying process of the city, the spaces who might have separated some zones before are now a point of fighting and about how to share the space. And in the last consequence, the question is kind of who belongs, who owns the city, or kind of what is city good for. So now I come to the second part of my presentation. I want to introduce kind of like two kinds of measurements, what we are dealing in Berlin, how we deal in Berlin with that situation. The first strategy is a management strategy, which we call, which we are solving with the matter of mediation. That we also heard yesterday is a quite well-known matter of solving conflicts already. So is in Berlin, meaning that we organize roundtable discussions with all the stakeholders of nightlife, with the neighbors, with the clubs, but also with local administration, and in the field of Berlin, or in the case of Berlin, also with Clubcommission as a moderating and mediating institution of that conflict process. So what is main ideas about a mediation process if it comes to noise complaints with the neighbors? First thing, what you have to make clear, or kind of the signals that you have to address, is that you take the issue serious. that the complaints of the neighbors, the needs of the neighbors, that they can't sleep at night, that they hear the bass drum of the club, and that there's so much noise from the people in the street or whatever, that you take it serious. That you also signalize it, that you're not only a club owner, that you're not only kind of like working for a lobby organization like Clubcommission to promote the ideas of clubs, but also you're a citizen of of Berlin, that you also might live in the neighborhood, and that you kind of also have different perspectives than only kind of what it is about to, what you need about to run your club in the most profitable way. So taking the issue serious is one very important first thing as a part of the successful mediation process. Then, of course, you have to clarify that the situation the club's in is legal. So if it is not legal, you have kind of there's a lack of arguments, of course, and so you should definitely develop the situation to make it legal, because then also the complaints of the neighbors and the issues of the neighbors might do have more substance than simply complaining, but then they might also be or kind of claiming their very rights. So clarify the legal situation, that the emission of the sound coming from that clubs is within the legal boundaries, and that also helps to identify this, or kind of to describe the situation as something which can only be solved by mutual arrangements. Then in the third step, if you have discovered that the situation of the clubs are legal, and you still have the reasons why people are complaining, then okay, then you have to identify what is exactly the problem. Is it, I don't know, the rhythm of the bass drum coming out of the club, which is maybe not louder than permitted, but maybe it is kind of like wall on wall with the neighborhood, with the neighboring house, so that the common walls kind of transport the sound in the neighbor house, and so that they can't sleep at night because the whole house is kind of like shaking in the rhythm of the club. Is it the people in the street maybe queuing for the club and chatting and, I don't know, having a drink and waiting for friends under the windows of the neighbors? Or what is exactly, oops. Okay, yeah, thank you. To identify what is really the problem, because only if you identify what kind of problems exist, you can find mutual arrangements to solve those problems and to re-establish a peaceful neighborhood. I want to give you an example of a situation in an area which is called Am Flutgraben in Berlin, which is a kind of like half island, a small island, which has been formerly an industrial zone, which has been run down, and a lot of empty spaces in that zone. And then there was a situation that the owner of that property thought it would be a good idea to get some clubs in, so he can rent the space and make some profit out of it, and maybe see what comes out of it, and gain some time to maybe develop it even in a more profitable way. So then we have more or less 8 clubs on that zone, and it wouldn't be a problem if that would only be this industrial zone with this club, but on the other side of the street, a residential zone starts, of course. And the residential zone is close by, that's one aspect, but also because of 8 clubs in this industrial zone, a lot of other institutions and stakeholders of nightlife establish themselves in the neighborhood, means bars, restaurants, hostels, and these kind of things, also late night shops, and who provide also the tourists and the partygoers with alcohol and during the night, so that there's also an attractive zone for a large number of tourists, of course, and we have heard about all that kind of like relations between those groups and the neighbors coming to causing the conflicts. So we have from the people, we have noise in the street, because people are going to the clubs, coming from the clubs, going to the bar, coming from the bar, standing in front of late night shops, drinking beer, waiting for people to meet, and so on. We have the noise from the subwoofers of 8 clubs, that it is just not one club, that kind of like have some noise emission, maybe also in summer. It is, of course, something, but we have 8 clubs, and of course 8 clubs, there's the chance of that one of those clubs has an open window somewhere or an open door which breaks kind of the sound barrier, and so it is quite likely that these kind of things happen. But also we found out that there is a lot of noise coming from a nearby park, because young people are going with their mobile sound systems into that park, hanging out in the park, drinking beer, listening to loud music, and that also is part of the conflict situation, but which is kind of independent of what comes from the clubs. So we had several roundtable meetings with those neighbors, also building mutual trust and see if we could find measurements of common solutions. And the measurement of what we found here was to establish a night watchman run by, or kind of financed and run by the clubs, means that one of those 8 clubs, they all have night managers who are there from the very beginning, or kind of like hours before the club starts until the club ends. And we gave him a mobile phone for his pocket so that the neighbors can call that mobile phone, and only the neighbors have the number of that night watchman, and report if there's any noise complaints or issue. So this guy has the task then to go out and find out what is the cause of that complaint, and maybe he is able to identify it and can report about what is the problem. Are this the young people in the park? Is it a club where a window is open or whatever? And can see if he influence at least the club situation to make the situation better. And what happened is that we don't have to go to the figures, but what I want to show you is the green and the orange and the red dots. We have monitored the whole situation over the summer, and it was a really hot summer this year in Berlin, so everyone wants to sleep with open windows, of course, and a lot of people have been going out at night because that was the only time of the day where you can enjoy living to the fullest. And we started in the middle of May with the monitoring and end in the middle of August. And what you see is the green part of our cake indicating nights without complaints is growing step by step. On every month we monitored, the part is getting bigger. The yellow part disappeared completely, and in the end of August, over this period of hot summer time, we had only one complaint from the neighbors, which we couldn't solve, and 14, so we cut in the middle of August, nights without any complaints at all. That means kind of that this measurement was a full success. So what we have been agreed on is that we meet in September again to analyze the situation and see what we have achieved. But this meeting in September never happened because neighbors didn't feel that it is necessary anymore. So what I'm not saying is that we have solved the situation forever. And the next summer is coming, and maybe also new situation is developing, but definitely we found a good way and a very effective way of solving that problem during the summer, so that also neighbors now have the idea of that they can be partners of the club owners, and that nighttime economy is not their enemy. And so the second strategy, it is not a management strategy, it is a strategy of technical issues or also financial issues. Because in Berlin we are facing the situation that clubs are a very essential part of the DNA of the city. Means that the city is very much benefiting from the nighttime economy, the club industry. As we heard, a lot of tourism is caused by the clubs, but also it makes it such an attractive city that we have the largest startup scene in Germany now, which has developed in Berlin, so that all these young entrepreneurs who are the future company holders of tomorrow, that they all want to set up their company in Berlin, because here they meet the creative heads. Here they have the chance of very cultural and colorful nightlife, which is also very essential for their own well-being and their own idea of what they would like to live in, what their living situation should provide. So in the past, those neighborhood conflicts often led to closure of the clubs, or to at least the situation that the club has to move somewhere else, because there wasn't any mediation process and there wasn't any measurements from government or from city of Berlin to solve the problem. So in the final aspect, it is left to the court to decide about how to solve the solution, and often it meant that clubs had to build noise protection walls or take complicated and costly measurements to improve the situation, which are beyond the reach and the possibilities of the club, and so they have to close or were displaced. So, but the situation also changed in Berlin, because we are now for nearly 20 years addressing to politics and addressing to administration about nightlife issues. And so 20 years later, we start becoming a city with government and also with administrative personnel who has been also part of the club scene in Berlin when they were younger. So we don't have to explain what club culture is. We don't have to convince them that there is a need for a vital nightlife. So they know already. And as we have heard before, the developments of densification, touristification, and gentrification are not developments which are mainly to be caused by club and nightlife institutions. So there's a communal task now, solving the conflicts, and when you solve the conflict, you also save the clubs. And what we do is, or what we did, and which is definitely very, very actual, is to set up a noise protection fund. In this noise protection fund has been set up to help clubs to finance measurements of noise protection. In this fund, there's 1 million euro, and we can spend that money until the end of the next year, kind of to help clubs who have been in a conflict situation in the past, or actually in a conflict situation, or even if you can identify an upcoming conflict situation already. So we have 1 million euro, and we said that there's a maximum of 50,000 euro for each club, which you can apply for to take active measurements against the noise, noise tension and the situation which have to be solved. So what we expect from the club is to contribute an own part of like 10 to 20% of the whole amount, which is to be spent. And also what we give him is an expertise of what measurements could lead to what effects. He don't have to pay for it. We are taking it out of the fund overall, so that every club who is in a conflict situation is getting this expertise for free, independently of if he's then taking or applying for money to solve that situation, if the situation is too complicated to solve with an amount of 50,000 euro, and that we have to find different ways of financiation or whatever. But then at least we have an analysis of the situation, so that the club can definitely knows what to do, and we all know what to do. And what we also established within this noise protection fund is an independent jury who decides about which situation has to be solved first, the priority of the applications, so that we can take urgent action very fast, and a situation who has to be solved in the midterm or long term, that we can take some more time for this process. Okay, so that are two examples of how we solve noise issues in those areas. I think you're kind of in Tbilisi, you're some steps ahead of these things already, but it is always a good idea to think about those situations which also occurs if you rise the amount of tourists visiting your beautiful city in the future. Thank you very much.